supporting you in your dog parenting journey. The Dynamic Dog Owner with Debbie Potter. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Dynamic Dog Owner, the podcast designed to support you, the dog owner, in your dog parenting journey. So today we are joined by Tash McHugh, who is another trainer at Potter Paws. And we're going to have a little bit of a debate about a topic, because I know we have differing opinions. So hello, Tash.
Good morning. Hello.
So Tash, tell us a little bit about yourself, sort of where you are, like how long you've been working for Potter Paws, so just so people get to know you a little bit.
So I've been working with Debbie at Potter Paws for the last 5 years. Had to think about that, for the last 5 years. So I started with Debbie volunteering on a Saturday morning. In my previous life, as it feels now, in my previous life, I was in the corporate world doing account management. Very exciting stuff, selling batteries to grocery companies. And then I took part in a dog training qualification, I suppose, and found a love for it and approached Debbie to start volunteering with her, which she very kindly allowed me to do. And then that progressed into working with you on a Saturday and an evening. And then 3 years ago now, giving up the previous life and coming with you full time. So
and now we're stuck with you.
And now we're stuck together.
It's like very glue. Scary to think that it was 5 years ago.
It's like scary. Crazy. It's scary. We can judge it based on how old both of our boys are, because we both got Remus and Murphy at a very similar age, and they both turned 5 this year. So that's how I judge how long we've been together based on their age.
Yeah, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. But so some of you who are regular listeners, you'll know Tash, or if you're not a regular listener, but if you come to classes or have ever trained with us, you'll know Tash because you'll have met her. But if you haven't, then this is obviously your first introduction to Tash. You can find out more about Tash on our website, and see a picture. And if you're listening and not watching on YouTube, you can see a picture and see what she looks like. And Tash helps with all of our aspects of training. Would you say you've got a particular favourite topic that you like to teach, or a specific favourite activity?
I mean, in terms of, I suppose, what people would consider what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of non-general training. I love hoopers that I teach, which is like a fun, low-impact agility. In terms of general training that people would think of for their dogs most commonly, I mean, I love puppies, because who doesn't love puppies? And outside of that, recall is probably my favourite topic to teach. I love it. I think it's so much fun.
I agree with that. It can be quite fun. And one of my favourite topics is the complete opposite of lead work. And I think, I'm not sure you'll agree, Tash, but I think that lead work and recall are probably the most common things that people want to work on when they get a puppy. They're the things they strive to get as sort of reliable as possible so that they can enjoy life together, because I think they're the two sort of main areas of training that actually have the biggest impact on people's lives.
Yeah, 100%. They're like the bread and butter, aren't they? That people really want and need their dogs to kind of work on, depending on where they live, what their goals are. It's always going to be one or the other, generally, that people value really, really highly.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously we have a conflict, because I like lead, you like recall. So today we're going to kind of have a little debate about this topic of which is most important. Because some people would say, recall over lead work absolutely is the top one. And other people would say that lead work is more important over recall. So everyone's got a different sort of priority as to what they see. And that can be, I think, depending on your lifestyle, as you say, it depends on where you live, where you have to walk your dog, etc. Some people will have a different opinion. So shall I let you put your point across first, or shall I go first? What do you think?
You go first.
You go first. Okay, cool. So I'm basically going to argue today that lead work is so much more important than recall. And Tash is going to obviously go for recall is more important than lead work. Obviously, I know we both have our passion. We clearly both think are both very important. And we both are passionate about teaching both, but I think we both just have a little edge on one or the other. So as I say, my passion is lead work. I absolutely love teaching lead work. I like working on lead work. I see so much value in it. So I believe lead work is more important or most important, more so than recall, because you can choose to let your dog off the lead, but you never have to let your dog off the lead. So there's a sort of argument that if your dog never goes off the lead, does it really matter? You can choose. So therefore, if you go, our recall's not great, or we haven't had time to work on it, or it's not where I want it to be, you can choose to keep your dog on a lead. You can choose to keep them on the long line. But for most people, lead work, so having your dog on a lead and needing to walk them on a lead, is an essential part of dog ownership and living with a dog. So you have to, for example, put them on a lead to potentially go for a walk, obviously depending on where you walk. If you walk in towns or built up areas, then you have to have them on a lead. It's actually part of the highway, isn't it the highway code, where dogs have to be under control on a lead next to a road. So that's part of the law. That's what you should be doing. So your dogs have to be on a lead by that. Obviously, if you're walking somewhere where you can let them off, generally you have that tiny little period at the beginning where they are on a lead. So, for example, in a car park, or if you're walking 100 yards down to where you can let them off. So you have to have them on a lead for that bit. If you're taking them to the vet, if you're taking them into the groomer, if you're taking them into appointments, they have to be on a lead. And some places, like, National Trust places, for example, dogs have to stay on a lead whilst they're there. So that's why I believe lead work is most important, because you have to keep on a lead at some point. You can't avoid it. And even though they're really short periods of time, so it may just be walking to the vet and back, or walking to the field, or walking from a car park, that snippet of time, even if it is only a couple of minutes, can be incredibly stressful and painful, and just put you in a bad vibe for your walk if your dog is an absolute arse on the lead and pulling and tugging and trying to get away from you, trying to escape out the lead. Even though it's only a short period, that can be a real pain. So that's partly my argument, that you have to keep your dog on a lead at some point.
That is completely fair. There are some very valid points there. I think for me, you're right in the sense of, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating and going that I think because recall's my passion that every dog should be off lead and never on lead, because that, like you say, in certain situations that just isn't, that's not feasible, that's not possible, that's, But for me, the reason I love recall, and I think it's a really important topic for people, is obviously, like you say, depending on where you live, you experience it more in some places than other places. But what I love about it is the fun and the relationship and the bond and the connection that you can build with your dog through recall. I think, when you've got your dog on a lead, yes, of course you can still make lead work fun. But I think the connection and the relationship you build with your dog off lead is just as important, because there's not something there keeping you together and keeping you attached. It is based on all of the prior games, prior fun, prior connection, prior relationship building that you have put into you and your dog that keep you together. And off lead isn't just about how far your dog can be away from you and recall him back. It's just as important to have them off lead and be able to stay connected, and probably more important for them to be off lead and still stay connected with you without running 50 meters away in the woods from you, is there isn't something keeping you attached. It is purely based upon all of the relationship that you've built. And I think relationship is a massive thing when it comes to recall. And I'll probably go into it later with one of mine. I also love, one of the things that I love most about my dogs being off lead, and it's something that, again, I'm quite passionate about in different ways, is seeing dogs do what dogs were bred to do. So I've got two springers who are both bred for hunting. And for me, having that relationship with them off lead where I can hunt them in the woods or in a field or wherever it may be and see them do what they were bred to do, I think is a really magical thing to watch. And it's beautiful to see, dogs get their nose down and as I say, do what they were bred to do. And that doesn't obviously have to be sort of in a working sense. That can just be in a fun sense for food or for a tennis ball or whatever it might be. But for me, seeing dogs be natural and moving freely, I think is a really magical, beautiful thing to watch. And as I say, I think for me, recall isn't necessarily about your dog being as far away as possible and being able to call them back. I think the thing that, in a way, I'm more passionate about in the recall sense is your dog being off lead and not having that thing that has to connect you, but having that relationship that keeps you connected without anything needing to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think there's valid points for sure. I definitely agree that on a lead, especially on a short lead in general, yes, dogs aren't going to have as much opportunity to be dogs, to run free. Completely agree with that. There's nothing nicer than seeing a dog running and exploring and moving at their own pace. Personally, I think that can be recreated without having to have good recall. So, for example, longer leads. So long lines, which most people have come across before. I think we've talked about them on podcast before, but basically a long lead that is a fixed length. And obviously the beauty of those is, if you haven't ever come across one, is that they come in multiple lengths. So you can obviously have your standard short lead is normally 2 meters. You can have 5 meter long lines. You can have 10 meters. You can have 20 meters. So, in theory, you could go up to any lead length you like. So dogs can still be on a lead and be under control, so to speak, but have more freedom. It's not quite the same, obviously, now, is it? It's going to be, there's going to be some limitation.
No, of course, it's not. Of course. And, people who have come to classes with us will know, we are big advocates of long lines, and they do, like you say, they absolutely serve a purpose. For me, like you say, it's not the same. I think, your dog, there's still that feeling of being attached versus when it's off, and that weight aspect, no matter how light a lead is, there's still that, when you're pulling something behind you, there's still that weight aspect of being able to feel it. And, you've got you can hold a long line, and as we know, long line handling is a skill in itself for people.
It certainly is.
To learn. And I think sometimes people find it really, really hard to handle long lines. And they can be, of course, depending on the terrain. If you're in an open field, a long line's going to be far easier to handle than if you're trying to recreate something in the woods and there's trees and brambles and
people, if you're walking as a group
around it.
Yeah,
of course, it is much harder. And you've then got a second step where you can go, right, well, I've got a long line, but I'm going to leave it trailing. But you've then, of course, got your dog can go, a little bit away from you into, again, you can clearly see where I walk my dogs because woods are the first thing that comes to mind for me, is, your dog goes and gets it wrapped around a tree or stuck in a bramble, and then they're a bit stuck. So, yes, they serve a purpose, but yeah, they definitely don't. It's definitely not the same as them being free to move without being attached to something, for sure.
Yeah, fair point. Equally, in terms of, 'cause obviously, guys, you're going to know that we both agree with both elements here, but we're arguing a point. And I'm very competitive, so I want to win. You can have a vote on our social medias. Who wins?
Yeah, we'll have to have a vote and see who wins.
Totally. Fair play about long lines. Yeah, they can. It is a skill. It is a skill to hold them, to manage them. Obviously, the more you use them, the more comfortable you feel with it, the more your dog understands. Yeah, walking in woodland, you're going to get tied up. But then equally, that's where we have the beauty of having secure areas that we can hire these days. So if your dog's recall isn't something you necessarily work on, or it's great until you meet distractions, you've still got the option of booking a field that's fenced and letting your dog have that freedom without having to worry about recall. And I think the connection part you highlight is really important. You do have to have a really strong connection for off lead. I believe that connection starts on a lead, because your lead, the misconception with a lead is it keeps your dog with you. And of course, yes, it does. But partly, I think lead work, when done well, is actually about building skill, building communication, so that you are working together as one rather than fighting against the lead battle. So in theory, the connection that you build through lead work is the foundation of then working on recall.
I think it's so dependent on the dog because,
Okay.
my two are completely different. For those that don't know my two, so my eldest is 5, as we said at the beginning. And I mean, Debbie will agree, it's fair to say that our lead work is not our strongest aspect
Hence you
of
like
our
recall.
training. Hence, I love recall. But our, not even necessarily our recall, his recall is very, very good. It is very, very strong. Um, but even his connection off lead is really strong. He will always choose to stick within, depending on the location we're in, a 2 to 5 meter radius of me. And that's not through, through anything of, he goes further and isn't allowed. He has the choice, he has the freedom to, but I've had him since a puppy. And in a way, I would kind of argue that, those games you play at home when they're puppies, and, I'll come on to if you don't have a puppy, because my second dog was a rehome at an older age. Those games you play at home as a puppy with toys or with food or whatever it might be in the garden and in the house. I think you're building that connection without a lead from day one. And I would argue that, that connection starts from the day you get your dog home, whether you're using a lead or not using a lead. So, yes, again, like you've said, we both agree to a certain extent with each other's points. So I don't disagree with the fact that you build a connection on lead at all. But I don't necessarily agree with the fact that a connection starts on lead, because I think a connection starts from day dot, and that to me generally for mine starts off a lead rather than on a lead. My second dog, who is a year younger than him, but I got her at 1.5, so I got her sort of in the middle of her teenage years. um Her lead work is a lot better. She is a dog that I can walk quite comfortably on lead and is quite enjoyable. She came to me and her recall was the weakest area for her because of where she'd lived before. She lived on an edge of a wood, and the temptation was there every single day for her, and it was a very high temptation. Um, and so for her, yes, I'm not going to sort of deny any fact that initially, yes, we started on a long line. Um, we started on a long line, but we started working on relationship building at home and at work without necessarily the constant of a lead. And I would say for her, probably in a way more so than him, because I didn't have him from that young 8, 10 week old
Mm.
age where they kind of need you. She was in that more independent, confident stage where, in a way, she'd already learned that she didn't necessarily need someone and she could be independent by herself. Um, I believe that the strongest part for us that has really secured her recall, and she's now off lead, and there's very rarely a time that I feel I need to put her on. And obviously, when I say that, I mean that in the sense of when she can be off lead. There are obviously times from safety points of view where when she has to be on a lead, she is on a lead. But she's rarely on a lead now, and I put that predominantly down to the connection and the relationship that we have. That we've built a certain element of trust that she doesn't roam. She roams a bit further than him because that is her natural hunting pattern. It's never very far, but she does roam a little bit further than him. But I put that down to the relationship and the trust that we've built, because she now chooses to check in actively rather than it. Again, in a way, rather than it being recall, this is probably more an argument about off lead connection rather than recall in the traditional sense of recalling your dog when they're 10 meters away from you and you want them to come back. For me, it's probably an argument more about the connection we have with our dogs when we're off lead is really an important. And actually, in a way, I could probably count on two hands how many times I actually traditionally recall my dogs when they are off lead, but we stay connected the entire time.
Okay, I think those are very valid points. You're right. You know, as a puppy, generally your connection starts off lead in the garden when they're free to choose to run around after you. That connection is free choice. And free choice is obviously really important, and we are very big advocates of dogs making choices and those choices being rewarded. And I suppose this is where, obviously I'm going to argue the point of leads. Lead work helps, because when they are in that independent stage, how do we teach them to stay within a certain parameter unless we've got a boundary or a barrier, like a long line saying you can only be this close to me? So most people again will know, if you've done any training or if you've listened before, we'll often recommend that if you've got a recall problem, you actually keep your dog on a lead to prevent self-rewarding. So there's a dog over there, there's a sniff over there, I don't need you, I'm going to go and get it. So that's where, to help you get that focus off lead and to have a good recall around the distractions potentially, you need the lead work foundation first, so that they understand there is a physical something boundary to stop me going and getting what I want. And obviously, this is where I think that the lead work skills that you teach on a short lead transfer nicely onto a long line, which can then help them get to the recall stage. Because obviously, self-rewarding, I don't know if we've talked about it much before, but self-rewarding is where your dog can help themselves to their rewards. So for example, with Coco, your younger dog, I don't need you, there's woods here, I can go and get them and I can go and sniff them all. It may be that your dog's out of reach, there's a dog out of reach and your dog wants to go and say hello to it. How do we teach them to focus on you when they're in that distracting environment and they want to be elsewhere, unless we've got a lead to teach them that that's not a thing you can do? If their lead works naff, then they're going to get to the end of their long line and they're just going to pull you and pull you and pull you and pull you, because they haven't got the foundation of knowing, when I feel a boundary, I should come back or I should re-engage with my human. And then when they start to learn that and they can do it without relying on the lead, we can then let them off lead. So hence I think that lead work is more important, because those skills help you transfer into off lead freedom, but in a controlled manner. And obviously it makes your life a little bit easier rather than pulling on the lead.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like I say, yes, I did use a lead initially with Coco. I guess it depends how you view it, doesn't it? Because if I look at Murphy, for example, I suppose it depends how you're viewing the tool of the lead and sort of lead skills versus recall. Because for him, as you know, short leads, we don't get on very well. And, that's a different topic, because I know half of that is me and half of that is him. And it's a joint,
Frustration.
Frustration, yes, many words. But he's always been relatively good on a long line. He's far better now on the long line than he was originally, for sure. but in a way, I don't know, I feel that I didn't necessarily teach a lot of skills on the long line. It was more, yeah, to your point, I suppose, more a boundary teacher as opposed to a lead skills teacher. For me, his long line was there for me to work on, I suppose, the recall aspects, and I don't feel I necessarily worked on lead skill aspects with it. So in a way, I kind of think that I viewed my long line as a recall tool as opposed to a lead skill tool in a weird sort of way. Um, I think also, and again, this is where I think it does, obviously every dog is different and it does, of course, depend on the dog you've got in front of you. And I think, to your point, age definitely does play a part because, of course, as we know, and I'm sure, people who have had puppies into teenagers or rehome teenage dogs will know, teenage stage is a
A
different
challenge.
stage, and there are lots of different challenges that that throw themselves up. But I think, if I look at like a puppy aspect for a second, I think one of the things that we kind of do a lot of with puppies is we do a lot of practice and things at home, and that's all lovely. But I think sometimes in that very early stages where we know puppies rely on us a little bit more and like to stick close to us a little bit more, um, sometimes playing those games in, I'm not saying, really, really high distracting areas where there's deer and pheasants and squirrels and 50,000 dogs running around, because that would be a recipe for disaster. But in, those slightly, just a little bit more exciting areas, that playing and replicating those games at home is really important to do from a young age to build that relationship in different areas, and as what we call proofing it and making sure that what works in one situation works in lots of different situations. um, and I think sometimes there's a nervousness around puppies of letting them explore different areas when they're really young because of what's on the floor and what they might pick up and what they might smell. And I think letting them explore different areas from a young age can help build all of that relationship in those areas for later on.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. I think partly it comes from a person brain. We tend to kind of like compartmentalize things and go, well, recall is something we practice in the garden. When we're out, we're just going for a walk. You don't tend to see people playing games with their dog outside. One, because they
Yeah.
feel stupid in front of other people watching them. Um, but secondly, we see it as, oh, we're going for a walk. And I want them to engage with me off lead, even if I haven't actually shown them this is a thing that it can happen outside. So I think that point of, when you have a young puppy playing at home, or even any dog, playing at home with them is really important. But then taking that fun and that play into real life setting, sort of independent of a walk almost, is where you can build that connection. And I suppose, again, lead work, I think lead work is something that people tend to see as has to be on the shortest lead possible. And there's the crossover of like heel work, lead work. Um, Lead work for me is the thing we talk about, because it's basically knowing lead skills. Don't pull on the lead. I don't mind where you walk, just don't pull me. When you get a new puppy, as you're saying, long lines, giving them that freedom is really important. To me, that's where the lead work starts, of having the freedom and learning the boundary, but you're giving them that freedom first and saying, you've actually, rather than having a tiny puppy on a 2 meter lead, them going, everything's out of reach, everything's so exciting, I want to see everything. You can give them a longer lead and say, you can sniff, you can explore. I'm meeting your sort of natural pattern of walking, but you're on a lead. So it's a nice, gentle way of introducing that lead boundary. And then over time, as they start to go, oh, okay, I can't go too far away, we can use the lead to shorten it ever so slightly each time, so that it gets to that standard 2 meter lead length. And then if done well, lead work isn't about, it shouldn't be a stress. It's about the connection. Um, so similar to recall, really, it's not about the lead being a tool to keep your dog with you. It's about them being connected with you despite the fact they're on a lead, and they are choosing to stay within their lead boundary because of the connection you build. So it's kind of a chicken and egg, really, isn't it? they complement each other so well. And anything I've always said, anything you teach with lead work affects your recall and improves your recall, and anything recall based affects your lead work, because both of them are more about the connection and the relationship and the boundaries you have with your dog rather than the lead.
It is, and I think that's literally what I was going to say. Is ultimately what we're both arguing is about connection, and
Totally.
your argument is connection with a lead, and my argument is connection without a lead, but both come down to that underpinning point of, and it's something we talk about in class from day one of puppies, and every course we do is the most important thing to teach your dog before you teach them how to walk nicely on a lead, before you teach them how to recall, before you teach them anything, is having that focus and that connection with you, because ultimately without that you're not going to have either. You're not going to have a dog that can recall, and you're not going to have a dog that can walk on a lead. You're going to have the worst of both worlds, because
Yeah,
you don't have that connection between the two of you. And ultimately that is, more than anything, that is the most important thing to have with our dogs. And that's why, you know we do talk so much about relationship, because it has such an overpowering impact on absolutely everything that we do with our dogs.
totally it does. Totally it does. The engagement, the relationship, the focus, the bond, whatever you want to call it. That is the overarching thing of everything. Um, I think the lead aspect is purely that we have a barrier. And I think people wise, it makes us feel in control. Your dog can't go somewhere. You can't go anywhere. And it's kind of, as you say, we've kind of argued the point that we both agree to disagree, and that actually focused engagement is more important than both of them. Um,
It
oh
is.
well.
Really, it is.
It is, yeah. Because if you think about it, off being on a lead, it's basically your dog choosing to hang out next to you, even though they're on a lead, and to learn that the boundary is you don't go further than your lead. We don't use the lead to make them stay. So the connection and the desire to be with you is the important part. We just happen to have a lead on, and if you get to the end of it, you know what to do. Don't pull me, come and get a little bit closer to me. And off lead, it's almost having that invisible boundary that normally is established by having a long line, let's face it, because they learn I should only go this far away. So leads are important. But it's despite having no lead on, you still choose to stay within the boundary the leader's kind of taught you almost. Would you think?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. As I say, I of course, I do use one with puppies, and with, as I say, with Coco when I first got her. Um, I think for me, and again, obviously every dog is different, but for me, I view them with they serve a purpose for a time, with my end goal being that they are not there forever
Yeah,
for my dogs, and that they act as a bridge between where I am and where I want to get to.
yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah, I think they
Because my end goal is always that I can watch my dog be free and at one with nature, um, and free to explore, and free to do what they should be doing. Because I think, as I say, I think obviously dogs are domesticated. We have them at home. We do lots of, we take them to training classes. We do lots of different things with them, but I think for me, one of my favourite things, and as I say, it's almost turned into more of an argument of off lead connection for me rather than recall in itself, is um, watching, as I say, watching my dog be free to do what they should be doing is absolutely magical to watch.
Totally. I think, as you say, it's we always have the culture clash between, people, people's lives and what we expect dogs to do, and actually what dogs need and what they were designed originally for, and the lifestyle they should be leading. And I think we have quite a big culture clash these days, because generally people want to take their dog everywhere with them, even if it's not right or normal for a dog. And often that's where a lot of conflict comes from, because people generally want their dog to just go everywhere and do everything and be perfect with them all the time. But most of the time, dogs just want to go run in the woods. that's what they're designed to do.
And I think, this is taking a completely different turn now into breeding and why you get your dogs. Is I also think it's people now have, certain lifestyles, and obviously I will caveat this by saying I'm not referring to everybody. Obviously, when I talk about this, is that I think sometimes people choose their dogs these days based on what they deem is going to fit into their life in terms of a
Size,
size or a
looks,
temperament that Google says that breed is going to have, as
grooming.
opposed to what was that breed bred to do? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
grooming is a massive one. What was that breed bred to do? As I say, for me, I think we could talk about all of our dog breeds, between us with this. For me, spaniels look beautiful. They have wonderful, looks about them. They fit a nice medium dog size. And for some people, not everybody, for some people, that means that they fit into the family, the house, the
Yeah,
car, whatever it is they have, and they forget the fact that they are working dogs. They were bred to hunt, and they like to
be
use their
busy and
nose
be
and retrieve
doing.
dead things
Mm.
from you. And similar to your boys, labs. If you look on Google, labs are the best family pet you can get. Their temperaments are wonderful, and yes, of course, they're lovely breeds. But again,
Puts a very
they
high
are
expectation on
working dogs,
them.
and then yeah, and I think there's that old thing of, oh, labs are born half trained. They're not. They are just as hard work as other breeds are, and they will want to bring you the TV remote and your socks and your dirty pants from the washing basket, because that's what they were bred to do, to bring you things. And I
Totally.
think linking in with seeing dogs do what they were bred to do, I think in this day and age, something that I would urge everybody to consider when they rehome a dog, when they buy a puppy, whatever it might be, is think about your lifestyle and what it is that you want from your dog, and look more at the breed, what they were bred to do, what their innate behaviours are likely to be, and build up from there, as opposed to the size, the grooming. And obviously,
Yeah,
I appreciate for some people it's allergy related, and that's slightly different. But looking at what your dog needs to fulfill their life, I think is far more important to build a decision up from, rather than looks and being
yeah,
sort of bred, chosen down, and the kind of behaviour aspect being the final aspect to be looked at.
definitely.
That was a complete
Definitely.
tangent, sorry.
To be honest, it
As
wouldn't have
these
been
things always
authentic if we
go.
hadn't gone off on a tangent, would it?
As these things
Um,
always go.
so
Oh dear.
I think from a dog owner perspective, that off lead is probably a hell of a lot easier than lead work. If you can walk your dog off lead, that's easy, because you haven't got to hold stuff, you haven't got to
Yeah.
manage a lead, you haven't got to think. So I think from a general person's perspective, most people would say off lead is more important, because I want my dog to run. I want my dog, I don't want to have to hold a
Yeah.
lead. I don't want to have to worry about all those things. So I think that in most people's perspective, that's why lead work is probably more important. But then I think when we look under the surface, we realise that actually lead work is very important too. Because you've got the argument of obviously you can just go, well, I just let my dog off the lead and I don't got to worry about it. And it kind of builds back to our off lead sort of connection versus recall. What's the actual difference? Off lead focus or just being connected with me off lead is I chill out near you. I'm not bothered by my environment. I will keep coming back and checking in with you. You don't have to recall me. Recall tends to be more of a I need my dog to come back to me right now. And I think recall has those two parts that actually they need both parts for it to work. You need to have the general off lead focus so that your dog doesn't just disappear off into the woods miles away, but then equally have the recall that says, if I need you to get back here, you get back here really damn quick. So it's almost like a twofold bit, isn't it?
It is. It definitely is a twofold bit. And I think some of it also stems from, I guess, kind of the age we live in now versus I think traditional recall is, that obedience factor of my dog is, 10 meters or however far away from me and I can recall it back. And that is the traditional sense and the traditional view of obedience recall. Whereas
Definitely.
for me nowadays, recall for me isn't necessarily that. It's not showing off that my dog can be 3,000 million miles away from me and recall back past, every single distraction there is. For me, recall nowadays is, in my sense, is more about, like you say, that off lead connection as opposed to the traditional obedience sense of recalling my dog back to me. You're right, we need both are very important. But I think for me, it's almost that, if you can teach that off lead connection, how many times you actually use your traditional obedience recall is
It's
actually
zero.
very little on a walk.
Yeah.
On a walk. So I think in a way it's almost changed a little bit with, how dog training and everything has evolved. But yes, there are still those two elements, and I think recall, as it stands, is still seen very much in that traditional sense. And actually, I would probably argue that actually it's more about connection off lead than it is about recalling your dog back
Definitely.
to you.
And equally, that's where you've got the two parts of the lead work as well, because again, we tend to think of lead work as being walk nicely to my heel, which is again an obedience activity. Whereas lead work is basically learn what to do when you get to the end of the lead and choose not to get near the end of the lead. So don't pull me. It's not be next to me. And it's a combination of learning what to do when you reach the end of that lead, the person, the human, the dog owner, working out how to hold the lead, how to feel comfortable with everything, because there's a lot to hold on to, and there's often that awkwardness of where to hold my lead and all of that part of it. So the human end of holding the lead, the dog learning the boundary of the lead is the lead skill part. But actually, the important bit is the focus and engagement and wanting to be near you, and equally not being distracted by other stuff around the environment. So both of them
And this
really
is
got
where
two
I
parts.
say, yeah, and this is almost where I go back to our argument earlier of, I think we're both arguing the same point, which is focus and engagement and connection and relationship and all of that. And I think it almost boils down to that thing again of how dog training has changed over the years. And it's not so, or certainly for us, it's not so much obedience based of my dog can sit and walk in heel and can recall past all these distractions that I've laid out on purpose for it to recall past. It's about living with one another and communication and connecting with one another, which underpins everything we go on to do. And I think that is just a natural progression of how it's evolved over the last few decades and years.
Definitely. And that's equally why, obviously, if you've listened before, you may have heard about this. That's why recently, I'll say in the last year, we created a brand new course that is all about focus and engagement, because the lead skills teaches you lead skills, the recall teaches you to strengthen your recall cue, but actually you need the focus engagement first. So for both to be successful, you need the focus and engagement. So it kind of ties us up nicely to lead work versus recall. Do you still stick by your argument that recall is more important than lead work? Or are you going to throw a curveball and actually say it's focus and engagement?
I'm always going to throw the curveball of it. It's focus and engagement, which underpins everything. So to me, that is the number one. A recall for me comes second to focus and engagement. Lead work is still down there somewhere.
It's only because you don't like it. So
yeah.
I agree. Focus and engagement is actually more important than both of them. But lead work for me is the secondary, because for me it obviously you need the focus and engagement for everything. You need it if otherwise they're just a dead weight on the end of the lead, right? So you need the focus and engagement. But for me, the lead work is still going to win, because I have to have my dog on a lead at some points, and I need them to learn those skills of you don't pull me. And for me, it means that, I mean, I don't know about you, but I believe that my dog, I've got obviously 3 dogs, you listeners know. 2 of them have been a challenge on lead. 1 has been a dream on the lead. Not anything I did, it's just his personality. And obviously we've supported his personality and created a very strong relationship, so it's been easy. The other 2, it took a while. Dave was probably 6 by the time he really worked on lead skills and was a joy to walk. And for Fred, it's taken a good, I mean, he's 3 in August, so he's coming up 3, and it's taken those, I would say, 2.5 years. I believe the one who can walk nicely on the lead has more of an interesting life. So for me, it opens up more because I can take him places. I can take him on days out because it's a joy to walk him on the lead. The other 2, I'd go, I'll leave them at home because it's not fun. So, and obviously these are places where I have to keep them on the lead. So if it was fields or anything else, that would be completely different. But for me, the one that can walk nicely on the lead gets more. So that's why I still stick with lead work.
I think ultimately, again, it comes down to dog's personality, because my dog who isn't as good on lead, he doesn't cope as well in built up, in situations where I have to have him on a lead with people around, because he just finds people and noises overwhelming. But going back to your point about your 3 boys, again, with all of them, you could argue that yes, Rem is the best on lead. Dave has made massive progress over the last few years, and Fred is getting there, bless him. But ultimately, all 3 of them, it's directly linked to that focus and engagement element of Rem's lead work and off lead, not just his lead work, is so strong because of the relationship that he has with the people that he's with. Not saying that the other 2 aren't, but obviously Dave it just wants to be everyone's best mate, so finds it harder in those built up areas. And Fred just finds, a leaf and a feather and life so distracting.
Exactly.
That it's not necessarily his recall that isn't strong. No. It's not necessarily his lead work that isn't strong. It's his focus and his engagement that he finds the hardest. So really, all 3 of them, both in terms of their lead work and their recall, I'm just arguing focus and engagement now.
Change parties. You've changed your opinion.
Just like a politician. Comes down to that focus and engagement they have directly impacts both aspects, their lead walking and their off-lead recall, whatever you want to call it.
Very true. Very true. So we kind of have definitely voted for focus and engagement rather than anything else, haven't we?
Yeah. Yeah, the end vote of that is not lead work or recall, but it's focus and engagement.
Well, interesting to know. So hopefully you have enjoyed listening to us both change our arguments, and obviously why we believe that lead work or recall are potentially more important, or really in case of his focus and engagement. Do feel free to comment and let us know which one you think is more important. Head over to our social media channels, or you can comment on this episode, and we'll put a little poll up on our social media so that you can have a little vote, and let us know which one that you think is most important. Or maybe you just can't decide and you think all 3 are really important. which I think probably overarching, we would say all three are, they go hand in hand, they cross over. Your lead work
They
improves your
do.
recall, your recall improves your lead work, your focused engagement improves
There's
both.
lots of grey areas.
Totally. But yeah, I'd still vote for lead work. So thank you very much for joining us this today, Tash, and giving us your opinions. And
Thank
we will see
you.
you all next week. Thank you for listening to The Dynamic Dog Owner with me, Debbie Potter. See you next time.